And the dog comes in. Okay, so I was just going to do this because I've been an SAT tutor, ACT, GMAT, GRE for like 25 years. So I figured I'd weigh in on the scandal that's rocked the nation about cheating in colleges. As I close the door, since the dog haven't taught the dog to close the door. Dang, gotta work on that. Anyway, I do know people who know the girls who've been named. I did look on the 50 people to see if I knew anybody, but of course they wouldn't have come to me since they were going to we're going to cheat it. My take on all this is that while yes, these people should be the moms and dads should be tarred and feathered or put in a pillory, the old like Frontier Village, if they throw rotten fruit at you and stuff. It's really not that big a deal. And when the Department of Justice says, we've got 200 people, 200 FBI agents who've worked on this. I'm sure some in very ancillary, ways, but nevertheless, is this what the FBI is about? I thought the FBI was about like, the Unabomber, tracking, 9/11, the guys who, took over the airplanes, things of that nature, even, Waco and, much more serious things that they're being charged partly with the RICO Act, which is all about the mob. It just strikes me as complete overkill. But again, I'm not saying these people are nice people, but I just think that a little bit like the Lance Armstrong thing, where they spent millions of dollars, and what were they trying to figure out? Like, did an American cheat in a French bike race 10 years before? It's a question of kind of what should the federal government actually be interested in? Again, this is all stream of consciousness. So if I ramble, it's just part of the deal. And stream of consciousness, not in the James Joyce, I'm a drunken Irishman who's fixated on prostitutes and desperately worried about kind of what hell he's going to go to because he can't because he keeps gravitating towards them. Or the Virginia Woolf version of stream of consciousness, where she gets so depressed she puts rocks in her pockets and wades out into the river and drowns. I do hope that the girls were involved, and I would say why that was the case, simply because if they weren't involved, they're going to need years of family therapy because they're going to hate the hell out of their parents. I mean, she had like 2 million followers, YouTube, Instagram or whatever, was maybe monetizing that to maybe $1 million a year. Missed the first week of classes in her first year because she had a free trip to Fiji through sponsors. So can you imagine you've got all this and you don't want to go, go to college, whatever, and your parents basically just kind of Bigfoot you into it, and then they just blew up your life. All that Tresemme and Sephora, and I think they've all been dropped. They dropped them, of course, and everything. So I just hope that she was involved. Now, I know that I've heard people say, well, yeah, she had to be, or whatever, she took some pictures on a rowing machine, but I've also read that she really wasn't involved in the application process. So, I could see a teenager going, yeah, I really want to do this, but if you fill out all the junk, right, and you kind of just say, just kind of let me kind of ease into this, I'll do it. So they're filling out the applications, they're writing the essays. And, the mom goes, oh, well, the counselor thinks it'd be good if you showed you were sporty. Why don't you sit on this, this ergonomic machine and do it? And so you just kind of go along with it. But again, I think it's a reasonable supposition I'm making. But of course they could have totally been in on it and desperate to go. It just, that's not the vibe you get from, listening to those girls talk. Other observations from like this last week. A guy wrote in the Federalist, I think, a really good, an actual kind of contrarian position on this, which I agreed with. Don't remember who it was, but I think it was in the Federalist. How actually this shows the meritocracy actually does work quite a bit, because these people with quite a bit of money, quite a bit of status, privilege, actually had to engage in really underhanded ways. And I agreed with that. I know they've talked about, I think the guy Singer said, he had helped like 861 families or something, which to me seemed to be an oddly specific amount of number to that. But the FBI actually had him go back and call people who, had been involved in 2012 and things like that. So I don't think, if they had more people, they would have had him go back and solicit those people, remind them, oh yeah, didn't I do this for you? And they made some kind of cake. He was telling them that they was being audited. So they had to make sure they were on the same page. So, I think that's going to be all the people. And they're talking about 33 parents. So what is that? Maybe 25 kids, a little bit less than parent, two parents, one kid, two parents, two kids. So, 25 kids for 2011, 2006, like 5 years, that's 5 kids a year. So again, going back to my why is like the FBI really interested in this. So you've got, where is the harm, right? There's a Latin phrase for that, which I can't remember at the moment. It's like cui bono or some who benefits, but who's harmed? Let's take the worst case scenario. You've got a kid who's number one on the waiting list at Stanford, right? He just didn't quite, because somebody bogarted his spot here. Some wealthy entitled person, a cheater, took his spot. Well, where does he go then, right? Worst case, he gets bumped down to maybe Penn, right? And then there's the number one person at Penn waiting list who gets bumped down to Columbia. And the number one person waiting list at Columbia gets bumped down to Michigan. And that Michigan person gets bumped down to UCLA. You might just disagree with that kind of terrorist thing I just did, but I think it's fair. So, this is not some huge, just calamity. You could also make the case that, you're number one on the waiting list at Stanford, you still might get into Harvard, Yale, Princeton. And those are kind of the big shipe, I always call them, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton are like the ultra elite, ridiculous schools that students with, perfect SATs and 4.4s, and they're valedictorians from private schools, and they still get, no, you didn't solve that water filtration problem in Botswana when you were there over that summer of your junior year. It's really kind of crazy. So that's my whole take there. Like I said, there is a good article on the Federalist about it that I'm kind of parodying something he said there, which I thought was well said, a little bit out of the mainstream. The easy thing with this whole thing, with the celebrities and the beautifulness and the when the girl, what's her name, Olivia Jade, it's like some writer, you'd be like, no, you can't call it, you can't name her that, that's too silly, they won't believe that, and then she's on a yacht in the Mediterranean, with her friend's father as a trustee on the board of USC. Again, sometimes you're like, well, I couldn't write this. It would just, people would laugh at it, it's too on the nose, I think, as they would say. Anything else? I did notice I didn't read all of it. I read excerpts from the Vanity Fair on Beto O'Rourke, though again, he seemed to have only come to his nickname after he left school. Talking about he was born to run. First off, a couple things. Beto, I know, does have a past in music, kind of a punkster. He seems to be channeling Bruce Springsteen in that. He's born to run. My response to that also is on an individual level. If somebody tells me they want to be a politician, to me, that's like someone telling me they want to be a mortician, right? My first reaction is, ooh, why do you want to do that? Okay. But at least morticians really do something practically that we all agree needs to be done. Okay. Because we don't want, like Aunt Gertrude, just kind of in the corner of the living room, kind of propped up. It works for the Irish wake, but then we kind of want to get her out of the house. Politicians, no, I can't see much usefulness in them. But anyway, so Beto's, he's born to run. The piece in Vanity Fair is just, hagiographic, and it's just love of him, where you're like, is this what journalism is supposed to be about? And even Vanity Fair has done some, weighty, has some gravity in the things they do. What was another one that struck me as similar? Kamala Harris. She was saying how, being tone deaf, Kamala Harris was saying how Mike Pence, it was ridiculous that he had basically the rule in his life that, he didn't really have dinners with women who weren't his wife. He never went drinking. It was always with his wife. She thought that was ridiculous. I've actually always thought that was a good idea. I remember reading it initially years ago, Billy Graham talking about the door always had to be opening, just to avoid the appearance of impropriety in and of itself. There's also, a famous old saying, which means, like the average man learns from his mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others. And I've always thought that was being a wise man and not, putting yourself into a situation where, something untoward could happen. The reason I mention that, you got Beto, who thinks he's, channeling Bruce Springsteen. He's more like those safety kind of dudes. And you've got Kamala Harris saying, well, that's ridiculous. And why is he doing that? When Kamala Harris had a rather long-term affair with Willie Brown, who was married to someone else. I think they were kind of estranged in their way, but she had a long affair with him. So it seems a bit hypocritical there. Or, he, of course, Willie Brown admitted he helped her, got her first two kind of political jobs, completely got her the financing for her first, I think her run for district attorney in San Francisco. I think my facts are right, but again, it's stream of consciousness. So, feel free to fix my mistakes. So again, there's another Democrat who was kind of just off the ball. Then there was Elizabeth Warren, of course, who, when asked if she had any sympathy for the parents in the college scandal, said she had zero. And of course, Twitter, which I don't go on Twitter for the same reason I don't go to the middle of Grand Central Station and start screaming at the top of my lungs, looking around at other people screaming who occasionally give you thumbs up or thumbs down. And also, as my daughters pointed out, people saying really vile things like how people should kill people who are depressed, and then people on Twitter say you should kill you, and it's half of it's anonymous. It just seems really bad. However, Twitter can be funny, and in this case, when Miss Warren said she had zero sympathy for the parents, someone on Twitter said not even 1/1024th, of course, referring to her play at being a Native American or Aboriginal American, I think would be more accurate since they're not really native. Came across the land bridge, Bering Strait, right? Can't say First Nation because they weren't nation. They were a bunch of nomad tribes who, didn't have any written language. So, but regardless, not even 1/124th. My overall point with that is that if you look at those three people and some of the responses Kamala Harris gave after she initially kind of jumped into the Jussie Smollett thing, talking about it being high-tech lynching, and then being asked some questions about it, when it came out that he had fabricated it, and I haven't heard that, is that I think we're going to see, and prognosticating is always a bad deal. As my son will tell you, when I told him when iPads came out, and I said, I don't think these are really going to amount to anything. Yeah, it didn't turn out that way. But my feeling is that the Democrats have been whatever it is now, all 15 of them, they have been so ensconced within a cocoon of the media, just kind of cosseting them, keeping them, just everything's fine. You're in the hot tub, it's warm. Here's a little champagne. Yeah, I mean, Kamala Harris is out, picking out clothes with reporters. I think they're really going to suffer when, as things move forward, as they get closer to a general election and they have to deal with Donald Trump, or even just, themselves now they're going to start to, harass one another. And I just don't think they're used to it. They're not used to having, their ideas. Look at somebody like Ben Shapiro who goes someplace, people line up to ask him questions, that are, antagonistic in many cases. He's very much used to just dealing with confrontation. I don't think most of the Democrats are. Add to that, there's old, cliche in politics, what I think is true is where, when you're in the primary, you run to the left or you run to the right, because you're trying to, get to your base and tell them, you're the greatest thing since, leftist sliced bread, or, similarly on the right. The problem with the Democrats, and again, I don't like to say like anything's different because history tends to just be the same, it's running the same thing with, different characters, but they have pushed themselves so far to the left. I really wonder if they're going to be able to come back. They might have just fallen off the map and they're not going to be able to get, back to any kind of like Joe Biden, working class way, or they're just going to be the party of identity politics where, if we distill the Democrats, I don't call them Democrats. I don't call them liberals anymore. They're just leftists. And if you distill them down, they're only really interested in a few things. They're interested in how much melanin your body has, how much money you have in your pocket, and like what's your junk doing. Okay, does your junk want to go to the other kind of junk, or does your junk want to be with similar junk, or perhaps maybe your junk wants to be the other junk, and then who knows, all bets are off. That seems to be more and more the Democratic Party, and I mean, I don't know if that's an effective, an effective long-term strategy. I mean, I'm not making, I think maybe making the point colorfully, but certainly a lot of pundits have talked about how, like the white working class and just working class Americans have kind of left the Democratic Party to some degree. Famously, I mean, Ronald Reagan, who was a Democrat, after World War II, and I think into the 50s or so, maybe mid 50s, and he of course became a Republican, kind of successful Republican, worked out for him pretty well. And I remember someone asked him, hey, why'd you leave the Democratic Party? And he said, he goes, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me. I just kind of start to feel like that's really, more and more that might be the case. Now, really, is that borne out with, there's so many independents, and, obviously Donald Trump's a very polarizing figure. But I mean, nevertheless, I do question how far left they can go before, there's no coming back. You can see it on the extreme left where, the whole anti-Semitism, the anti-Israel, that's kind of splintering the Democratic Party. That's troubling. Then you can go even deeper with there's the whole transgender schism between some, like, I don't want to mischaracterize this because I'd like to be factual, not that I really, like a big deal, but that, like, if you're some, like, gay lesbians or the feminists don't think that some of the transgenders should be, like, included in the same group, because if you're, and I've always wondered this because it seems to be kind of contradictory. So if you look at, the athlete formerly known as Bruce Jenner, okay, he wants to become a woman and he becomes, what would you say, like a stereotypical cliched woman. He's got the fancy dresses, he's got large boobs, right? So a lot of feminists believe, well, male and female, that's just all social construct. So then, what's Bruce / Caitlyn is actually now conforming to the patriarchy. So there's this huge schism of these people arguing over, is he the right kind of woman, so to speak? I mean, I would think that, again, it's illogical, because if you're a guy who wants to be a woman, or vice versa, then you must be sort of conforming to whatever social construct you believe it is. And if you're a feminist who doesn't believe there's social constructs, well, then you can't even really want to be a woman, right? You just want to be whoever you are. And I mean, again, it's like a rabbit hole of distraction. But that's where, Democrats are, they're maybe not that far off. That's more of the edge, but they're out there, trying to find out, kind of what's going on with theirs. Anyway, I've talked enough, I think. I wanted to end these with I plan to do more, and I wanted to end this with a book review. All I'm going to do is I read a lot of books. Most of them are nonfiction. I kind of read all the fiction I wanted to, and nonfiction actually becomes more spectacular because these things really happened. Just look at something like what Alex Honnold does climbing El Capitan, right? You couldn't write that; no one would believe it. So, but I'm just going to work every time I do one. I'm going to end with a book review, and I'm just going to work from the last book I read, and then go all the way back. And I've read about 1,400 books. I don't know if there will be 1,400 of these podcasts. Last book I read was Underground Railroad. It's like Colson. I'm looking down here. Doesn't even have it on there. Colson Whitehead won the Pulitzer last year. The conceit of the book, it's 1800s. I think maybe 1820s. Don't quote me on that. You've got your regular kind of the depravities of slavery. It turns out that the Underground Railroad is actually a railroad. Okay. Now I'll talk about my review a little bit later. Like, no, I'm not sure why he does that. But I have one idea, but if that's the whole thing, So anyway, bottom line, if I was going to, 1 to 10, I'd give the novel about a 4.4. Okay. The fact that it won the Pulitzer, well, it's kind of designed, right? It's this perfect, kind of just a bandage on white guilt, that we can all feel bad because over 200 years ago, I mean, people were doing awful things in America. So let me just get to it. It's the only thing I'm going to read from this here. Seems almost designed to garner awards from white guilt. All one has to do is note the underlying passages through the novel. This is one of the interesting things about, because I've always been a huge reader, and I mean, maybe 10 years ago I went over to the Kindle and I read on the iPad, and I always get book lovers who want to argue. And here I'm digressing again. Like, real books are better, and or the Kindle's better. And overall, I think Kindle iPads are better for a number of reasons. First off, hey, if you don't know what a word means, boom, you can, or you get some, ooh, Shiloh, it wasn't just a Civil War a battle. It was also a possible place that the Ark of the Covenant was hidden. Oh, I didn't know that. And again, love learning little bits of knowledge. So it's got that going for it. Obviously, you can read in line at the bank if you actually ever go in the bank, because you can have it on your phone. You can have 50 books. The library has now, you can just check out books. Their e-library is extensive. I almost never actually buy a book anymore. I just wait in line because I've got 6 or 8 books in the queue because I'm cheap like that and I don't want to buy books anymore. If I can avoid it. Every now and then I get forced to, because it's like, oh, I have to read this or whatever. The only significant way, well, obviously in a book, you have a better feeling if you're getting to the end, even though, you can look on your, on your iPad. I think I've been saying iPad, and, like, oh, I'm at 95%. But there is something about knowing, like, physically where you're in the book, which I think real books, 3-dimensional books kind of do better. But the one thing that books can do, okay, and I've had this happen, where you're reading an absolutely awful book. It's just ridiculous. Plot twists are insane. You can take your real book and you can just and saucer it across the room. Hits the wall. Yeah, you get to, a day later you come over, get it, and because I'm always going to finish the book, so you can pick it up. You really can't do that with your iPad. You really can't you can, but just once, and then it's done. But anyway, okay, let me finish the review. The thing I was talking about too is that you can see where people are underlining things. So it'll be like, 47 people underline this. What is so telling is everything that's underlined is just this, like, self-flagellating white guilt about slavery. I have 2 examples. That was, text from the book that got underlined a ton of times. This nation shouldn't exist. If there is any justice in the world, for its foundations are murder, theft, and cruelty. Okay. Another one, the Great War had always been between the white and the black. It always would be. Okay? These are the people just like, yes, this isn't just a story about Cora. She's a slave girl. Mom escapes, leaves her. There's a lot of hard luck, evil overseers, taskmasters. Also, a lot of, kind of internecine struggle there to see who's going to get the little bit of rewards you can get, in this, slave encampment. I think it's on an island in Georgia. It's not just a story. It's got to be some, terrible indictment of 200 years ago. Okay, so I go, it's fine for someone to write these things, as myopic and parochial as they are, but the great number of people who underline these thoughts is indicative of a people desperate to be aggrieved. What heightens the irony is that these desperate to paint America as sin incarnate are taking on the actions of those from 200 years ago, regardless of one's skin color, right? Taking credit or affecting abasement is ludicrous. No one is their ancestor 10 generations removed. Okay, I have a very simple way to define that. People go, oh, I'm worried about the future. And I'm like, your great-grandparents, you had 8 of them. People go, okay, right? Yeah. What were their names? Almost no one can even tell me the names of their 8 grandparents. I can't. Okay, I know 4 names, don't know the whole other side, and a few stories, right? And that's only 3 generations removed. So worrying about 10 generations, that's just somebody who wants to feel bad about, I don't know, themselves, their culture, their people. Now, the story is fine, okay, but there are several flashbacks, flash forwards, an anticlimax, and a mystery that's resolved kind of obviously and very sentimentally. So that detracts from the overall work. But the story itself, if you strip out the guts, is fine. It's just that it's not a very long book as it is. It's maybe 300 easy pages, so it probably could have been, like a novella or something. Though technically I always forget if novelette, novella, exactly how long those have to be. And then there's the PS. Why make the railroad literal? Its only function is to let Cora experience a travelogue of white depredations. She goes from like Georgia to Tennessee, North, South Carolina, I think Indiana. So it's all the different ways, I mean, slavery and white people are bad. Just, just harsh. I don't have to give any much. It's not like it's a plot strewn book, but from just the harsh whipping kind of things to forced sterilization, and on and on. So it's just a way to get her around kind of, quickly. Like I said, I mean, the train being real is just kind of there for that reason. It's a little bit like if you've ever read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's books, like 100 Years of Solitude or Love in the Time of Cholera. Don't worry, I'll get to those reviews. Those were many years ago. He has magical surrealism, where it's a normal story, and then like a guy in a flying carpet goes by the window, and nobody really comments. It's not part of the plot. It just kind of happens here and there, But at least his had a sense of whimsy. Okay, and then as a spoiler, between 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera, I think is a better book. Simply because the book starts out and this old man's died and his widow is there, very sad, melancholy, and this old man shows up and says something like, Maria Consuela, I have loved you for 52 years, 7 months, and 3 days. And you immediately think, well, that's ridiculous, right? And then Marquez does the really, ambitious feat of, going back in the story and showing you how he has really loved her all those years, but not in the way that you would imagine and not the way you would expect it anyway. I think it's one of the, I'm not a big fan of Nobel Prize winning. I've read, I think I ascribe to Mark Twain's idea that the classics are books that we all want to say we have read without actually having to read. Now, I've read most of the classics, and most of them are not good. A book really needs to get into the 20th century before it's really of any quality. Just like, I wouldn't buy a 1950s TV right now because rabbit ears, tinfoil, black and white, it wouldn't be very good. So books, the technology of how to write effectively has certainly gotten a lot better. And but Marquez's book, 100 Years of, Love in Time of Cholera, 100 Years is still a fine book. You can tell he's a really talented writer. I just think that Cholera is more focused, and it's really, because, of course, teaching all the tests and such, I always have students who, in school, they're like, John, I have this list. Which book should I read? And I'm always like, if your choice, I'm like, hey, that's not a bad book. Cholera also has kind of some sexy time in it, keeps students turning the pages. But anyway, that's my first. Well, it's my second. I think if you look, I also did a thing with a bench press challenge from a year or two ago. That really didn't catch on. Thought it was going to go viral. Didn't. But anyway, if anyone listens to this, thanks. And just remember, if you disagree with me, it's just because you're wrong.